And we're going to try to keep some more windows open in order for you to have some fresh air, because I understand that it is difficult to keep awake if there is not enough oxygen. Okay, stakeholder participation or participation. Is this just a buzzword? Is it panacea, solving everything, saving marine spatial planning, solving all the conflicts? Or is it a necessity? I would like to have, on one hand, a presentation related to what I have been working with and what I know from both my research and my work as a scientific coordinator at the Swedish Institute for the Marine Environment, which is somehow fulfilling a function as a knowledge turntable between policy and academia. And on the other hand, I would also like to get to know more about your own experiences and your reflections so far, because of course you had a task in relation to this lecture as well, and may have quite a few reflections, or you may even have own experiences working with participation and have experiences to share. I'm very happy that this course could come to being, and at the same time I'm a little bit scared, because this is the first time I'm being filmed doing a lecture. So I'm a little bit nervous, and I'm also a little bit nervous because it's the first time I'm doing this lecture in such a way. So I will try to keep the time and still not be rushing, and I would really like to have some kind of an interaction. But yes, why do I work with participation? I can actually give shortly my own experiences. After doing a master's thesis in environmental sciences at the Swiss Institute for Technology. So I'm not from Sweden, I'm actually from Switzerland. I fell in love with the sea as a 5-year-old. And then I wanted to become a marine biologist, which is difficult in Switzerland. So I studied environmental sciences, and I thought, oh yes, we need to solve these environmental problems. And then I realized when I presented my master's thesis that, well, knowledge is not enough. The right philosophy is not enough. Oh, maybe spatial planning, that's such an interesting instrument, and coordinating and all of that. So I started working at the regional administration for not marine spatial planning, but coastal spatial planning or shore spatial planning in northeast Switzerland in Turgovia. And when we then presented our regional spatial plan, we had, for instance, some very nice landscape protection areas, green areas on the map. And we had discussed this with the regional parliament, with the municipalities, with the different sector authorities. But when we presented this, wow, there was a protest from the farmers. And even if we had all the arguments and everything together, but yeah, what was happening? Oh yeah, we didn't talk to the farmers. So I started thinking, oh gosh, I need to get paid for reading books and for knowing more about social sciences. And that's when I started my PhD, looking at coastal management in Sweden and how far can you resolve or address coastal resource conflicts with an integrative and participatory approach, such as municipal spatial planning in Sweden. And what I realized after doing 4 case studies, looking at them to 10 to 30 years back in time, studying documents, interviewing people, observing meetings, I realized that yes, you can actually get more information, get a better plan, get engagement, get some solutions by having more participation. But there are quite a few prerequisites, and there are quite a few things that you have to work with. And it's quite costly both in time and in other kinds of resources. And then if we now think about marine spatial planning, which is a much larger area, how can we scale up this? So that's a really, really interesting question. And we are all working with this. And that's why, and I don't have the silver bullet. I want to say this from the beginning. What I have is years of observation of participation processes. I have theoretical knowledge. I have a background in social sciences as a PhD researcher, and I have quite a bit of participating, observing experiences from now what is happening with Swedish spatial planning and the development of the system. So that's my background. And yeah, I would actually like to give you a few questions, and I would say that participation is all about these 5 questions: what, why, who, how, and when. And the first thing, of course, is what is participation? What do we mean by this? And I want to discuss this with you because it's important, and it's also important that those who are working with participation agree on it. Next question: why do we have participation? Why do we have it in marine spatial planning? There are, on one hand, there are certain purposes, and they may differ between countries and between agencies, between stakeholders. But there are also a certain type of problems we are confronted with, which to some extent may necessitate some kind of a dialogue. The next thing I'm going to talk about, or we are going to talk about, is who should participate, or who participates. And there we are also have to talk about who is this and why, or what is the driving forces, and how can we mobilize them, or are they mobilizable at all? How can they be included is the next thing. How do we do participation? I'm not going to give you detailed instructions in facilitation and so on. I have actually brought a few books, and it's also in the literature list, one that is some kind of a Bible, a methodology Bible for those who have already some experience in facilitation, the Change Handbook. And there I would say that facilitating change processes in other areas of society is like facilitating marine spatial planning. It's just that we have some more language and cultural confusion, probably. And then there are 2 very simple and very easy to handle books, the Community Planning Handbook and the Community Planning Manual. And some of them are also, this one is even available in different languages. This one is only available in English. And they are very easy to handle. So for those who are beginners with participation, I recommend those. And for those who want to test something new, have a look here and get inspired, and maybe ask the people who have written the articles in this book. I'll let it go around. We're dealing with change processes. And then, of course, I would like to know from you, in your different countries, what is special about participation in marine spatial planning? And then we should have some kind of a comparison. And we may have to develop this further, and we will also tomorrow look from a sea basin perspective and from a stakeholder perspective, how does this look like, and how does this look like in relation to the institutional frameworks and in relation to what kinds of users we have in these marine areas. And summing up and outlook, I try to, so to say, collect some important issues again, and I would like to take you up with you what are the advantages and challenges of working with participation in marine spatial planning, and also answer the question about, well, is it a buzzword, is it a panacea or a necessity? Maybe you will have your own idea. So my first question to you is, what is participation? Buzzword, panacea, necessity, do we really mean the same thing? This picture is from a cartoon from the Baltic Plan project. And yeah, is participation some kind of a roulette or monopoly, or what is it actually? So what I would like you to do now is grab your neighbors, so you 2 or 3, just and exchange very shortly. Actually, I need to start the clock now, so to say, so I see it. Exchange very shortly with your neighbors. What do you mean by participation? Are there different definitions of the term in our languages? I can just give you an example from I think it was Africa, because I have some expert courses in international contexts, and what was very interesting was that participation meant something different, and it was very important. that also stakeholder meant something very different, because that depending on what we mean by a term, we also think differently about the process. And what could these differences imply for practice? So please, 5 minutes. Grab your neighbors. It's okay to be 4 if you feel... Du får gärna också delta. Okej. Mm?
Känner du till projektet Matrufka?
Nej.
Som är en stakeholder involvement som Sverige, Finland, Ryssland, alltså stora städer. Och de får in dem i
Åh, vad kul. Nej. Gärna. Jag har inte haft tid att just titta på de här olika praktiska exemplen, utan jag har haft mina olika fallstudier. Det är ju alltid liksom det här. Jajamän. Det är min käpphäst, konflikthantering och deltagande. Så det är mitt i...
Du skiftar ganska stort från det här miljöperspektivet.
Jag insåg ju att man kan inte lösa miljöproblem utan deltagande och engagemang. Det är i princip min...
Det är ju så som man väldigt grovt också säger att när det tidsmässigt, så länge man pratar om miljöfrågor så det räckte liksom i naturmiljö, men när man skulle ha in lösningar, alltså kartlägga och identifiera problem, men skulle man lösa det, då behöver
Måste folk, ja, och då måste man också förstå när funkar det. Precis, ja, och då måste man förstå vad är drivkrafterna bakom folk inte beter sig så som de kan. Alltså det behövs ekonomi, psykologi och alla de bitarna. Så, nu ska vi se. Jag kanske, ja, just det. So, what is participation? Can we share now in the whole group? I see that you have had very, very animated discussions, and I'm looking forward to get some input now from you. So, what does participation mean? If it is possible, we can just say call but listen to each other. So I can, and I need to catch up what you're actually saying. So, what does participation mean? So it is informing about what's going on. At the same time, you said one more thing. Something is coming back. Some kind of a motivation. Emotion. So it's about mobilization. Yeah, and mobilizing, motivation. You're actually already. It's not the meaning of participation anymore, but we are also already taking up parts, which we are going to talk about, which is very normal, and which is actually the intention. I want to raise things because what I'm going to do now is I'm collecting, and then we are going to put some kind of an order into what is now coming. Because the problem usually is you have a big understanding of very many things, especially in such a large group, but it often is that you don't have the tools to sort all the things and how they hang together. So we're working on common language, yes. So it's mobilization. Being part of something. Being subject, not object. Subject. So someone who is actually acting and not is acted upon. You approve? Okay. Any other aspects of the term participation? Yes, Jana? Yeah? Taking part. So that's the active. So being part, taking part on equal terms. Okay. Listening. That's part of the exchange, isn't it? Listening. I would like to have a bigger whiteboard. That's usually at the university I have a whole wall, and this is a little bit too limited. Okay, listening, understanding. But also expressing own interests, needs. Yeah. Let's see where we put that, because that's an important part of it, and it needs some space. Expressing interests. Yes, that's wisdom of spatial planning. Interests and needs. Okay, any more? I mean, I can just continue on the other paper. So you please, any more aspects you feel are important with the meaning of participation? Is it already what you have? Yes? It's a process. Something that happens through time. has some kind of a beginning, and then a time, and then it has outcomes. Riku? Legal obligation of public consultation, yes. Okay, yeah. So there is one part is the legal obligation to consult with those affected, and the other is the legal possibility to appeal. Legal right to appeal against certain types of, yes?
And one could say that the last one is the most effective usually and the least democratic in the sense that it's those who can run successful court cases against the authorities, they win, but they don't necessarily represent the public good. It can be very narrow interest.
So it's a question of resources to actually participate. And now the term that is used very often is also empowerment. And you can be empowered in different ways. You can be empowered by legal right, you can be empowered by knowing, by being informed, and you can be empowered by learning and knowing how to work the system. Yes? We will come back to all these things. Is there any other aspect you would like to raise right now?
Maybe it's already there, but participation meaning also the agreements or making decisions actually. In the final, it's agreement between different parties what we reach through the.
So
it's agreement.
a possible outcome of participation would be
Agreement.
Or an escalated conflict, and that depends on how well you manage the process. So that's something you can expect if you manage a process well, but you can also, and that's where we are coming in on facilitation. And I would also like to, we will come in on that also. Why do we have participation? And of course, this is one of the purposes. You want to somehow negotiate or an agreement. You want to anchor the idea. You want to include those who are concerned, so there will be a possibility of implementation. We will come back to this later on. Yes?
Participation is a process of different ways of communication. I don't need.
You don't need, okay.
Participation is a different ways of communication. There are different ways how to participate in the discussion, but it's not only the stakeholder meetings or the legal ways. It can be questionnaires, can be internet-based.
So you want to emphasize that there are different forms of participation. Yeah. Yeah. So we're already away from the meaning, and we're already into my lecture. Great, yes. I will take this up again, yes?
Very small, but in Polish language we have the verb partycypować,
Yes?
which actually has a very specific connotation, which means that I take part in, especially in some costs.
Okay, contributing,
contributing or taking, yeah, the burden.
taking part of the burden.
Not,
Ah,
Is that also responsibility?
that's interesting. So Polish means taking part, not just taking part in the process, but taking part of the burden. Is there any other language-specific definition which adds another aspect to this? What about Russian definition of participation? How would you what does it mean in Russian?
Participate. Участвовать.
Taking part?
Taking part.
Okay. So there's not such a big difference. I will come back to this, but it's an interesting extra connotation in the Polish. And so it is also the question whether Polish MSP participants are ready to take part of the burden.
translation, because
Yeah.
in Polish we will not use partycypować, the verb. We will say uczestniczyć.
Which
Has
means
a different connotation without any burden.
Take part.
ah,
We use the direct translation of this partycypować, participation.
can you please write the Polish? I don't dare partycypować. And that's an interesting thing. You're not using the term actually. You're using another term, which is very interesting. Can you?
Here it's okay.
No. Write the other one as well, please. And that's just being part.
Okay, so this is something,
That's the actually used one.
and this is taking part.
Take part. And this is not used. Not for participation in planning or. Okay, great. Actually, it's really interesting what we have come forward with. I would like. Yes, sorry. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm listening. I just can come with a Swedish example. If you have a meeting and you say something and everyone says something, and then the agreement is if you don't say anything, you're not against. That's passive participation. Whereas if you contribute to something, it's active. It's about, and also by helping, doing things. That's what you're thinking about. Mm-hmm. We will come back to this a little bit later on, when we are talking about forms and responsibilities also. I would say participation, I don't know whether you agree, but if we think about when we do project applications and when we look at all these political documents and so on, it is actually a buzzword. And just by looking at your discussion, I don't think there are so many people sitting who write the documents who are actually having that discussion we are having here. And they're not having the reflections that are coming. And this is why I would say that to some extent participation is a buzzword. And it can be filled with a very varying content and give the people lots of expectations, and then they start participating, and then when the plan is finished they see they have not had any influence and they're very disappointed. So buzzword, yes, but not just. And yeah, how can we make something of it? And here I would really add again, we can make something out of it when we know why do we have participation. What are the purposes? And then all the other who, when, and how is, so to say, following out of this. So my next question to you is, why participation? We have already started. And what are the reasons to have participation? And I would very shortly have some further exchange on that. Why do we have a participation? We have, of course, we have the legal obligations, which, so to say, sets the frame. We have some kind of, it's not really here yet. There's something, no, it's actually not, it's not nothing here. We haven't taken it out yet, but why do we have participation? What kinds of things can we expect from participation? Knowledge? Yes? Sorry? Influence? Yes. Influence process and the outcomes. Decision making. Yes?
I would say to achieve common ownership of the final decisions.
So that's again the agreement. We already have had the.
Yeah, but,
Yep.
but this is why we do participation.
Can you specify now?
Common ownership
Yes.
of the final decisions made throughout this process.
Through the participation process.
Yes, because then we have a certainty that this would be, the decision will be implemented in long term.
It's kind of quality of agreement, and it's a quality if it's agreed by stakeholders.
Well, then it's sustainable in a way.
I mean, there's two different things. One is the formal decision making, and the other is, so to say, that you feel, even if you're not the one who have actually made the decision, you somehow think that's, oh, okay, I have been part of the process. I accept the decision, and that's what I interpret at least a little bit more into the common ownership. Whereas this is the politicians or those with formal rights to.
Participation, the politician may ask for participation to improve his decision making. But this other thing is that the people, Mr. Smith, says, well, this is my decision.
So this is the
I am
small.
the owner of it.
So you mean this is the smaller circle and this is the larger circle, so
Yes.
to say. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Yes. Other kinds of why do we have participation? Answers? Yes, Andreas.
Along with common ownership, I think common responsibility goes along with that.
of course.
Common responsibility. That's why I also was interested in participation processes. Whether you can create this common responsibility for the environment by having a process or not. Yeah, yeah. Yes, please.
I think that really, as usual, we make this participation, yes, do not have problems in future. Because if we don't ask now, then we'll have these questions and it will be late to do something with it.
Problems in the future. So the reason is avoiding problems in the future. Okay, yes? Future problems. And I think you said something here that is not just in relation to whether people accept it or not, but it's also about whether you have the right knowledge or not, or it can actually be expanded quite a bit. Yeah, yeah. Other reasons why we have participation. Yes? Two things, yes? Right to know, yes? Yes? Avoid, so it's the right, eventually democratic rights, possibly, and avoiding future conflicts.
Identify possible conflict zones.
Identifying. You see, Euro, it's expanding. Yes? Any more reasons? Probably this is not so relevant in the context here within Europe or so on, but if I'm talking about participation in connection with development and developing countries, it is also an issue about empowerment. And I mean, we're coming a little bit to with the democratic rights, we're coming about that, but it's also about lifting those who don't know, have nothing, have no possibility to affect, lifting them onto a level that is more equal to those who have actually access to resources and so on. So it's a little bit, I would say, if we're looking at all the reasons here, I see two types of reasons. One can be called instrumental. We want to achieve something. And the other is normative. And that's more related to empowerment and democratic rights and so on, and norms we have in society about how inclusive we are in our decision making, and whether the children should have a say or it's the parent just saying no, you do this or you do that, and that is very much based in the values of each society. So I want you to be aware of this difference, and also when you're organizing participation or participating yourself, be aware that there may be different reasons for why having participation, and also you as a participant may have instrumental and normative reasons, and you as an organizer of participation process have to think about, yeah, why do I now want to involve these people, and who do I? Then it's all the whole question. Who, how, when, and so on. Because depending on what I want to get out of the process, I organize it in a different way. I actually have one more reason. So that's the discussion. And I give you a few slides here. We have, from an ecological perspective in the Baltic Sea, we have problems, a certain type of problems which are rather difficult to solve. We have high use pressures and ecological sensitivity. The red areas here are the ones with the highest use pressure, and the red ones here are the highest ecological sensitivity areas. So ecologists think that we have some hotspots, that's the red areas, where we have high sensitivity and high human activity. So from an ecological perspective here we have problem areas or conflict areas. That's one picture. Another picture is the planner's picture. That's from the Helcom Vasab report. Here we have in Sweden coastal areas with high natural values, the green ones. The red ones and the black ones are areas of high pressure with settlement, the black, and the red high pressure with recreation. And then we have also low pressure areas with depopulation, and they coincide with these landscape areas. And valuable nature is usually maintained by culture, not just by having people outside. So in these areas we have a certain type of problem, whereas in these areas with red and green and black we have other types of problems. So that's a type of challenge. And here, just from a Swedish perspective, are the different areas where there are other kinds of transnational challenges, or shallow areas, or highly used areas, or coral reefs versus trawl fisheries. So it's this kind of a spatial perspective on problems. And now comes the social science perspective. We have high institutional complexity, and just the lecture this morning and the discussion this afternoon has shown this high institutional complexity. And that's a bloody challenge, isn't it? How are we going to sort this mess? And now another thing. You already named it before. We have very little knowledge. We should work with the knowledge. And it is fragmented. This is what we know about the land areas. And that's what our knowledge about the sea looks like. Some traffic areas, some develop maybe a wind power area where we know a bit more, or a ecologically valuable area. And then we have some depth, and then we know a little bit about the seabed, but we don't know very much. And we don't even know about the users, as Andreas has pointed out. And I really support that. And then another challenge is actually sharing this. That's again from the Baltziplan WWF cartoon. That's the Germans and the Balts and the Vikings and so on, trying to find out who is going to use the Baltic Sea in his own way. And the question is, of course, are there alternatives? And what kinds of alternatives are there? And because we have a bit of a problem here. We have high complexity with regard to stakeholders and high complexity with regard to issues. Marine spatial planning is somewhere here. And here we have quite a bit of institutional frameworks dealing with sectors and stakeholders there, and even locally highly complex issues can be solved with procedures, but we don't have so many procedures and institutions working in this square. And I usually say that, the sea is not a cake, the sea is a soup, but I'm not going to go into that right now. But what I would like to go into is that we are dealing here with so-called wicked problems. Does any one of you who has some kind of technical education have heard about wicked problems? Connection with risk management and so on. The term came up in the 1970s. You have, of course. So you're also already knowing where I'm aiming at. Yes, what is a wicked problem, or what could a wicked problem be? It's complex, yes. We're dealing with complex problems. We have different views, we have different values, interests. The complexity is also connected with crossing boundaries, administrative, knowledge, system, and so on. We have high uncertainties. We don't know what is happening if we do things. We don't know how people will behave if we take this kind of action or in relation to that. We don't know how the ecosystem is going to change. And we don't know how fast climate change is going to happen. And we don't know. And sometimes we don't even know what we don't know. And coming back to the empowerment also, we have large differences in distribution of access to resources and decision-making power about these. And there's differences in who values what, coming back to the interest issue. And wicked problem is somehow a problem. You have a problem that is something like this, and tomorrow maybe the problem is like this, and the day after tomorrow it's maybe like this. So it's an ill-defined problem. And if you have such a problem, there are certain difficulties to address this. And you cannot solve them one time for all. There's no best knowledge to find a best solution, but it's always choice, and very often between conflicting goals. And we need to negotiate. And that's where participation comes in. So there is one of the reasons. There is one of the reasons where I really think, as a researcher, that to some extent it's instrumental in order to solve these problems. We can't solve them alone, and we can't solve them with the existing institutional frameworks, but they are right now changing, and they're changing towards something that is called governance, from government to governance. Maybe someone has heard that before. So from top-down, directional, to some kind of collective shared responsibility. And I think all of these terms have come up now in the discussion already. And it's not just the so-called sector stakeholders, but it's research, it's communities, it's political parties, it's media and the general public sharing and interacting. But it is also a bit more messy, a bit more difficult to keep track, and a bit more difficult to also have transparency. And yeah, we're trying to find new institutional frameworks to deal with this. So, what are the practical questions if we deal with that? And have some kind of sustainability aim. How do we know? How can we produce knowledge? How can we manage it? When do we know enough? Who knows? How can we make legitimate policy decisions? And especially if it's uncertain. And how appropriate are our systems? And we have realized now that they are maybe not so appropriate, and we're working on this. And what we are working on, somehow you can say, is to try to increase the match between society and environment, trying to build in integrative features into the existing system. And now I'm trying to give you a bit an overview why this course is how it is. So we're trying to think about the integrative features today and tomorrow. We're trying to think about participation and resource governance on day 1 and 2, and then day 3 is more about the ecosystem and how this connects to us and to management, and how do we get this learning into the process. And for this we need monitoring and evaluation. So that's a little bit the whole course in a nutshell, you could say. So, do you know any of these principles that are now so en vogue? There's lots of acronyms, please. We're living with them.
You said governance, that's...
Yeah, what kinds of principles are we now using, or approaches that may go into that direction? Yes? You mean multi-level governance? Maybe, yeah.
Integration of policies?
Yeah. I'm just throwing up these: integrated coastal zone management, integrated coastal ocean management, integrated management of coastal marine areas, and so on. And there's quite a lot of other acronyms dealing with this. And important aspects are, on one hand, integration, bringing together boundaries, levels, different types of knowledge, different nations. We have the adaptive perspective, policy as an experiment, because we shouldn't do anything too fast because we don't know whether it may be irreversible. And for this learning, we need the monitoring. Yes?
There's a very famous new word, is evolutionary something. So it means that it's the same, like adaptations is evolutionary?
Well, it depends a bit on where it is used, but the idea is that that it is evolving based on experiences. But if you talk about Darwinian evolution, this is of course based on genetic selection, and that's not. It's more like we are in society now trying to think how do we have to change our behavior and so on in order to survive and develop. Yes, Nico.
So maybe, Jacek, in this context, adaptive management is more like monitoring, evaluation, and then change if necessary.
Right.
Yeah.
You evaluate whether you have reached your objectives or not, and then you adapt your policy based on this. And in that sense, I think spatial planning has been at least there's different philosophical streams in planning theory, but except for the very old time ideal of the rational planner and the expert who knows everything and one plan for the whole future, we now have realized that we need to revise our plans because we don't know what is going to happen. Yes?
I do not know any MSP handbook, leaflet whatsoever which is not using the CITEM.
Yes. So you're already you have already been, so to say, infected by the adaptation virus. And this is very, very clear in the literature. You're not thinking in a line anymore. It's a cyclical process. And
But
sorry.
what about something I'm missing very often, and that's prediction, using prediction.
That's another part in the process, and that's about strategic evaluation and about trying to establish links between A and B. And if we do this, what happens then? And there you also need to know some kind of scientific connection between you have an activity and you have an effect in the environment, for instance.
Not
Yes?
only it's, but the important thing, parameter which we will have to take into account in our planning is climate change. Now the prediction of the effects of climate change. And this is not point A and B that we know. It's point A in which we are, and the B which is
Opening up.
quite far away, but we have to provide for it also in very in a large range of effects. It's safety, it's biology, it's the whole ecosystem, it's our even food web, and so on.
Yeah.
And the sea. And well, proper integrative management, marine management especially, I think, requires needs the use of this kind of prediction.
At the same time, and I would like to come back to this, we say now, and because my presentation is with focus on participation, but I'm very much aware of this, and that's about we don't know, and how do we deal with this?
This means that the people have to know about these predictions. And
Yes, and it's about communicating uncertainty. Now there is some kind of interference. It's about communicating uncertainty, and this is something politicians have big difficulties with, and the public even more. And this is, I'm not going to give any solutions on that, but this is a big research and problem area on we need to work on. And but I would like now to come to the participation, and in that sense say that if we are talking about this issue of we have these difficult problems, we need to have a discussion, and as you say, we need to give proper information for people to make decisions. At the same time, we also have to say sometimes we don't know. So what are we basing our decisions on? Maybe we need to base it on values, and then if we base it on values, we need to have someone who is responsible, who has a mandate to take decisions based on values. But we maybe want to be part of that process. So it's going into that direction. And if we now even add the ecosystem approach and the ecological perspective, then we come about temporal and spatial range knowledge, other types of knowledge than scientific, connecting ecological and social systems, and societal justice, and taking care of the economic perspective, and not just the financial economic, but also livelihood economic perspective. And here, these landscape spatial perspective, like marine spatial planning has, are one tool to address this. I'm not saying that it is the only one, but marine spatial planning can be one of those tools.
But you want to say that marine spatial planning is almost impossible without stakeholder participation? Because
No.
the knowledge is so big that you cannot integrate it if you don't have stakeholders. Can I interpret rightly what you are telling?
No, I'm not saying this. Or at least it was not, I didn't intend to say this. I intended to say that we have big problems, and in order to make decisions about these problems, we need to have a dialogue. But in order to have this dialogue, we need to have some type of knowledge, but we also need to be aware of that this knowledge is maybe not complete. But still we need to make decisions, and that's the typical situation of a spatial planner. And if only the spatial planner takes a decision.
No, it's rubbish in such a case.
Yeah.
Because he cannot take responsibility
No.
of democratically elected bodies.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm not saying it's easy. It's rather it's a challenge, and I'm just maybe right now it sounds a little bit how do you say scary, but I want to be open and a bit scary. But maybe we are coming back into a little bit less scary areas now. I would actually start talking about who is who is participating, and also what and who is a stakeholder, and who has a stake, and why do people participate. We have already taken this up a little bit, and now I need to have a check on the time. Yes, I have half an hour left. Would you like to have another short group discussion on what is a stakeholder? And yes, we're already starting a class discussion. So shall we have an overall exchange? Who is a stakeholder? So my first question is, what is a stakeholder?
But generally, or regarding the cost, regarding the EEC or voters.
Just the term, what does it mean, a stakeholder? Someone who has an interest. Sorry?
Someone who's interested in maybe not
Interesting in subject.
Some,
Who is interested in subject?
but not has a specific interest in the issue. So someone interested in the subject is not a stakeholder. That's what you wanted to say. Is a stakeholder. What do the others think? No? So it's someone who has a responsibility is also a stakeholder. I would just like because we have not had an answer on the is someone who has an interest in the subject area but not in the actual issue. Is this a stakeholder as well?
Very nice thing. Do we think that an environmentalist from the Alps, who is simply interested in the subject of the sea, is a stakeholder? And well, somebody that says, well, I love this environment and I want this little bit of the sea to be so beautiful. I never will come there, but I see it on the pictures.
I'm not giving an answer. It's a question to ask, and it's also about future generations, those who are not here.
But everybody is a stakeholder in this sense.
So it's where you draw the line, isn't it? Yes.
Well, if we say he has an interest because, that's the lives of in terms of space.
So it's
Or something, or uses the resource in some way and so on. That's one kind of stakeholder. But
you're a resource
you
user,
say,
or yeah.
you say he bothers about his future generations or his children or anything else that's in some kind of future, then it's everywhere.
Because, the problem is on what basis you want to judge. If you want to judge on normative basis, so everybody is a stakeholder. Because everybody can say something about beautiful Baltic region. If you want to judge from instrumental basis, the stakeholder is somebody I must work with because my plan will never be realized without this cooperation. And this is instrumental point of view. And there is a third point of view, which means that sometimes the stakeholders can make a noise, disturb the process. So you should exclude somebody, because if you have too broad the participation, then you will never make any plan, okay? But this, I don't know, it's instrumental, no, it's normative, or it's... But okay, you have different perspective, and I don't know how
So,
to find a definition.
So what you're saying is actually that you may have to delimit the definition of a stakeholder, because it may make the process impossible to have. On one hand, because you have to ask the whole world, and on the other hand, because that's more of a procedural reason, because you will delay the process. But this is something we will have to talk about again. Now it was Lars and Rico, I think. Lars.
If you look at the origin of the term, it's actually very physical. It's somebody who stakes out a claim. He has 4 stakes, and he puts them in the ground, and he claims the right, for instance, to mining. So we are widening a concept which is basically from a situation where there is no property ownership, but you stake out the claim, and by that you claim to own the property. So, and I think it might be a good idea to think about the origin of the
That's from the Alaska Gold Rush. So you stake out a claim with poles and say, this is my area where I'm going to get my gold from. And yeah.
Also, there is a thing about dividing stakeholders in very important ones, or important ones in the meaning of having strong influence on the issue, and the ones that have big opinions but have small influence on the issue.
We will come to that tomorrow, that there are different types of stakeholders, and that you have to think about those who are influential, those who have formal roles, and how you, when you manage a process. Yes, Riku?
Yes, I was just sharing to one that is quite often in the past special literature, the definition of the stakeholder is someone who is affected by implementation of a decision, or someone who can influence implementation of the decision, which was already mentioned. But then we need to keep in mind is the legal procedures that in many of the planning laws it is already defined who can who has the legal right to complain, because it's not necessary that everybody can really have a legal right to complain. For instance, the environmentalist from the Alps supposedly cannot have any rights to complain about the marine or regional planning in the region in Finland.
So it's depending on how much power you give different stakeholders to either complain or affect the process or the content. And what I can just say from Swedish planning legislation is that there is public participation, and anyone can write a letter to the municipality. So it's very often open. I can actually, even if I'm a tourist from the Alps, I can write a letter to the municipality. So whereas if I want to appeal against the plan and the decision, then it's an entirely different thing. Then it's the stakeholders are quite clearly defined, and
Closer to the original concept of stakeholder, closer, but yeah,
physically affected, or yes.
there are different levels, kind of the legal thing, but then of course this what we are discussing on a fractional or general level could be stakeholder. It has to be a bit broader.
Yes. So we have a problem here. We have a problem of defining what is a stakeholder in relation. We need to put it into relation to something, isn't it? We need to know what is it in general. And what I can say is actually it's interesting, at least from African definition of a stakeholder, is actually someone who helps you carry the boat to the shore. Someone who is actually assisting. Whereas a stakeholder here in the British connotation, is taking out a claim, someone who says, I have something to say. So in that sense, it is also interesting, again, when you discuss across national boundaries, that you really have clarity about it, what you mean by a stakeholder and who is supposed to be included. So this discussion is actually a discussion you will have to have every time you make a transnational plan. And you have to go into it a bit more concretely, and maybe it will become also a bit easier because you have the sea areas. But maybe all of a sudden someone will show up and say, why don't we also include the boat people? Because they are also supposed to have a stake in even if it is offshore planning, but we have sailors in the offshore area. So it's a question of where do you draw the boundaries, and I'm not giving any recipe here. It's more, think about that. So, I would like to come to this aspect of stakeholders. We need to think about how can they participate, what kinds of aspects, what values, needs and interests and positions do they have. This is something that came up in the very beginning. We need to think about their capacities and possibilities to act and why they are affected. Are they affected in their basic livelihoods by this planning? What kinds of cultural aspects are important, and how does it look with regard to power? And what kinds of formal responsibilities and mandate do they have? And it's not just, I mean, in that sense, politicians or whoever can be a stakeholder in the process. Normally, stakeholder is very much used, it's the different sectors in European Union documents and so on. It's not like, whereas in Sweden, stakeholder participation often thought to be a bit broader. And then an important thing comes, and that's something you took up in the beginning. What do people get from participating? And that's the way how you can actually mobilize them. Because what we tried with the Bold Sea Plan project, the Middle Bank project, we had a number of stakeholders identified. But because it was no process, real planning process, because there were no resources behind it, and because there was nothing that really gave any kind of carrot, there was no participation. We couldn't mobilize the people. Whereas the Costa Sea National Park, when they started discussing about having a national park in the Costa Sea area with the coral reefs and the fishermen and recreational boats and so on, it was highly mobilizing. And the question is also, how do you deal with different groups? How do you give them possibility to access the table? Do they need education? Or with regard to the fishermen, right now the meetings of the Costa Sea delegation, they are usually on Fridays. Do you know why? Anybody an idea about fishermen? In Sweden, fishermen, they fish, at least in the Costa Sea area, they fish between Sunday night and Thursday evening. That's also an agreement they have in order to keep the resource within negotiable boundaries. And so the meetings, they are usually on Friday because that suits the fishermen, that suits the people from the administration, and it suits the people from the government. But the problem is right now, if you want to have people from local organizations, they are working at this time of the day. So actually you should have this in the evening, but this doesn't suit the people from the administration. So you have to find some kind of a compromise, and you may have to compensate those who are participating during working hours because they lose income. So that's this kind of issue. Or education, what do I have to know in order to be able to participate? What do I need to know about the system? And then it's also a question of timing and of how you communicate. We will come back to this because that's the next topic. Participation. I see two main forms of participation. And coming from Switzerland, moving to Sweden, it was very, very obvious for me. Switzerland is a direct democracy, and we usually go and vote. At least on municipal level, we go into the local training hall, and then there is a meeting, and in the end, okay, now we vote. Everyone lift the hand if you think this and that, or lift the hand if you're against. Or you can actually request a secret vote, and then you put the papers, and then elect 2 people to count. So that's direct democracy. Whereas most countries work with representative democracy, and also Switzerland at higher level works with representative democracy. But there are advantages and disadvantages. How would you say, if you think about direct and indirect democracy, what are the advantages of direct democracy or direct involvement?
Advantage is that it's democratic. Disadvantage is that it's too expensive, and everybody should take part all the time to take decisions, and nobody can do the real things.
It's time consuming, resource consuming.
Voting all the time about different things.
So that's, 2 important issues, yes? Any more advantages or disadvantages for direct democracy? You have a possibility to directly express your opinion. Yes. You can directly affect what is happening at the moment. And you can contribute with your knowledge about the situation. What about the advantages?
But
Sorry?
Is direct democracy then? It's the act of voting. The act of voting is a kind of decision I take when they say, okay, now you vote.
I'm now.
But the discussion is, of course, always if there's 200 people that are supposed to do the voting, of course, there will be about 10 which will be talking, and which doesn't mean that they will be saying the same I would like to say. So I think that there's a large risk in this direct democracy that I'll be led by a very good speaker, and on the speakers on one hand. Of course, the advantage is that if I have voted, I agree that this voting is the final solution, then I take it as my own. That's the strength of it.
I think, I would like, yeah.
But the greatest risk is that it can be result in something which is based on a myth.
You're pointing out an important thing that populism is a problem with direct democracy. But if I'm now talking more about direct participation and indirect representative participation, of course, this is a problem. That if you're in a public meeting, and then it's only the people who are actually able to talk, and they can actually turn the whole room into entirely different opinion. And there you also have to think about different forms of participation, maybe by writing letters, maybe by having small discussion groups. You can, so to say, vary the forms in order to avoid the drawbacks of this kind of public meetings. And from my own thesis work, I can say that public meetings are not the right way to solve conflicts. They rather lead to escalation. But collaborative group work and long-term processes are ways of working out conflicts, for instance. So it's very important on thinking when you think about participation. You have the equity issue and the local and so on, but you also have the complicated process, and you have the egoism of the individuals, and you have of course, what you're saying, also demagogism, which is a problem. Whereas with representation, you have the advantage that it is more effective, and but also you have the distance from the problems. And the question is also representation. And what I have realized with regard to the Costa Sea National Park is that representation does work if you give the participants who represent the resources, and if you give them actual mandate and the education to do the representation. But otherwise, it won't work. What I can show you is that there are research has had this kind of discussion and how far people have been involved in different ways, and that there are different ladders of citizen participation, from manipulation to therapy, getting treated, informing, two-way communication, being able to give advice, having partnerships, having delegated power, and actual citizen control. And I'm not saying anything is better or worse, but it is more a question of what you want to achieve in a participation process. And here's another example from the development context, where it was like, how do people participate in projects, in development projects? Is it some kind of functional participation? They do a task, are they getting paid for it? Are they consulted, or are they actually actively contributing to the development and to the solution? And from the planning context, there is another, and I think it's actually better to talk about the stairway of participation, where you have the information as a basic need. You have to inform those who are affected. You have to consult those who are potentially affected and inform. And then maybe you need to activate, and you maybe need even to establish some kind of collaboration because you don't have the resources. And if you think about the years from 1960s, 70s, 80s, and so on, you can also see that there has been some kind of a development of thought about participation in planning. This is from a German planning researcher called Klaus Selle. And just has vanished from the, yeah, I have to move it down again. But this is another way of thinking about participation. It's complementary steps. And I think from the article by Dover, you see more like a ladder of participation that is more like, again, information, consultation, collaboration, management, boards, partnerships, and user control with regards to marine resource management. And this is more like, this is a structure you can think in when you're organizing your participation process, and thinking, okay, if I want to organize participation, what kind of collaboration and interaction do I want to have with which kind of stakeholders, and why? And another thing to think about is the timing of the process. Is it from the very beginning of a process, including analysis, strategies, or is it in the very end when we already are close to decision making? And in that sense, I also always think about not just decisions and documents, but also of a cycle of information management and a cycle of participation. And when do you want to have people included? I'm somewhere close to some kind of a strange thing here. And the question is, if we're talking about wicked problems, we probably need to have some kind of participation already here in the beginning, because we need to define the problem we are about to solve. Because otherwise we'll get problems here. Because then people will say, when we exhibit the plan, you haven't actually taken up the problem, and we won't agree on it. So it's like, yeah, and maybe you're ending up here and say, oh, we need more knowledge, we have to go back. And that's actually quite normal as well. Maybe sometimes you can't go through the whole cycle, you have to go back and make smaller loops. That's a way of thinking. And another thing I would like to show you is from my PhD research, that when you look at what people write in their statements, usually the first thing that comes is criticism, protest. And then they come with desires and requests. Then local knowledge, more information, acknowledgement of positive aspects of the proposal, additional stakeholders and problems to include, differentiated alternative problem definitions and solutions and options, and offers to contribute. And the more participatory and long-term the process has been, the more of these kind of things will come in the process, at least in the local process. And now again, my question is, of course, how can you scale this up to MSP? I don't have the solution. I just have a few puzzle bits from my own perspective. And so what I would like to point out is we have important issues we have to think about. We have to think about power and influence in relation to roles and timing. We have to think about representation and fairness. We have to think about a transparent and legitimate process, and also about predictability. And this is something that has to do with both the regulatory base and clarity of mandates and communication, and that we also document what we're doing and we present this information. And trust is an important part in the process, and it will lead to contributions. And the third thing is, how do we deal with responsibility? How do we mobilize those who are a bit difficult to mobilize? And purposes, why do we have participation? Because this affects what we do. And if we deal with conflicts, they're unavoidable. But if we need to try to somehow create a constructive dialogue and avoid destructive escalations. And this is especially important in small communities, because you're depending on each other. And now I would actually like to come to some examples where we, so to say, can share a bit. I don't know how much time I have left. 7 minutes, I think. Yes. So, if we think about now the different countries, what do our frameworks right now allow with regard to participation? I remember about 3 presentations actually have had some information on that, but I was not quick enough to write everything down. But how does it look like with regard? We have national, we have regional, and then we have local planning. And some countries only have local marine coastal planning. Other countries already have a national system and have some regional or have regional planning. How does participation look like if we now start in, let's say we start in Poland? Is there, how on national level, is there public participation in marine spatial planning?
But what do you mean national level?
For the national, for the economic zone plans, do you have any?
Well, there is an obligation for participation within the legal framework.
Yeah.
Ensuring that the public has the plans or draft plans must be open to public discussion.
So drafts should be presented to the public.
Yes, but there are also some requirements that for discussing these things at very early stages with all kinds of stakeholders.
So it's the public in general and its specific stakeholders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's open to.
I mean, there is no definition of stakeholder.
No definition of stakeholder, but information and the possibility of discussing, opposing, and things is open to everybody.
So it's a two-way communication. So if we talk about which other countries do have this kind of national planning and public participation at national level? This is Estonia, yes? Germany. Latvia. This is LV. Mm-hmm. LT, yes. Russia. Do you have any kind of public participation by information sharing and taking in reactions from the public in Russia? Yes? Russia and Sweden, if the act is coming into force, once it is there. But that's at least what the intention is. What about the local level? Do you also, this is drafts for public review? Do you have any kind of this in Poland? Yes?
These rules apply to all kinds of planning, plans and programs.
Mm-hmm. Other countries? Yes.
I
Yes.
think
Russia.
Look, there's the directive which requires us to do it.
Sorry, this is
That's EU law. So I think this question is simply answered yes by everybody.
not entirely. It depends on how long this legislation has existed. Because in Sweden it has been there since 1987, and then Sweden was not in the European Union. So it's also a bit interesting how far. Is this something that has been affected by the European Union before it was not even available, or is this something that the actual country has come forward with by itself? And depending on that, whether there is a kind of a tradition working in this way or not, it can also be more or less difficult to have this kind of involvement and participation, and to mobilize people, and to actually have people in the administration working with this kind of public review. What about regional level? In Sweden we also have this kind of, so it's all countries actually. Some kind of a basic two-way interaction. Which countries do have a requirement for a report, a participation report, actually telling how we have reacted to these kinds of statements?
It's required in our case.
Is required in Poland, yes? Same in Finland? Yeah. Yeah. So this seems to be common standard as well. Which countries are going beyond that? I mean, that's drafts in the end of the process. Which countries do go beyond that, including the stakeholders in the discussion from an earlier point in time, at the beginning of the, yes?
We do, first of all, we have to inform everybody who is involved. Depends on the level.
Mm-hmm.
National level, you inform what kind of stakeholders, regional level, second kind of locals ones, the neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
But first of all, in the early stage, when you didn't start it yet to do the project, first step is to inform according to regulation.
Yeah.
All the stakeholders that something is going on, that the projects will be prepared, or starting to be prepared, and they have a possibility to ask.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second stadium is the conception. You have to, first of all, you have to inform everybody that conception is ready. Then you have to publish it, the conception. Then you need to wait for maybe some answers, maybe some letters, maybe some kind of effect. And if there is no, if there is no feedback, the institution that approves
Mm-hmm.
the whole project have to approve the conception. And you are making, for example, A and B or A, B, C conception.
So you mean there's different scenarios or different alternatives?
Yes,
Okay,
different
alternatives,
alternatives.
yeah.
Then the approval, the institution approves one or maybe a mix of it.
Based on the stakeholder process, or based on what the institution thinks.
Stakeholder process.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't get any
Reactions.
feedback,
Yes.
any reactions. And the third stage, it's always solution stage. You have to inform everybody, and you have to organize a meeting of the stakeholders.
So there's a meeting, a public meeting that is to be organized.
It depends if somebody's coming or not, the meeting have to be.
Some-
Somebody's interested or not, the meeting have to be.
So it's a hearing, a public hearing.
Yes, and then the approval institution decides which suggesting could be integrated and which was not, and they have to answer by letters and with strong arguments if they are not accepting the suggestions. And we have institutions that check the process.
Mm-hmm.
In the end of the planning process, you have to give all the documents to the checking institution, and it checks does it get
So you have what you're actually having, because what I'm trying to filter out is what are the generic features and what kinds of forms of participation do we have. So you have a relatively sophisticated system where you also have basic requirements that you actually have to have a public meeting, you have to have letters, and you have to have some kind of an evaluation of the process. And this is not legislated in all of the countries, I think, at least as I know from Sweden. Is there Finland? Yes? That's part of the, okay, in that it comes in, yeah. So what you're
the idea was only that this kind of SIA directive idea is also in the planning system, for example, in Finland, throughout the different levels,
and in that sense, I mean, if we are doing a strategic environmental assessment and we have to do this for marine plans, we also will have to follow the SIA directive. Is that true, or
no,
not really?
The same idea of the SIA
Yeah.
directives, for example, in our Construction Building Act implemented
Okay.
this way, but the same idea.
With relation to projects, yeah, yeah. So what we can say is that there are some countries who have also statutory participation at an early stage, even just collecting information, and then presenting alternatives to and then there's a draft plan. That's the thing that is relatively common. And some have basic requirements and others don't, and have it open. I mean, it could be interesting. I think you have had some parts in your presentations and in your assignments. If we can put this together in a table at the end of the course, this would probably be very valuable for all of us. What do you think? Yes? Which is?
From the new year, Lithuanian Digital Planning Act changed, and it changed from it's changed assessment, from all the basic, all the procedures, all the terminology, everything is changed assessment, and I cannot comment now how it will work, what kind of
No problem. We take it when it comes. This is we will take it as it is, and it is rather that we put a little note, this is under change, and we all know, everyone knows that our countries are in large change process with regard to their institutional systems, and this is so to say daily fresh wear, so to say. You have to be aware of that, but maybe some kind of an overview, if we can compose this as a result of the course, would be very nice. So if we come now to some kind of a conclusion, what if we think about what is special with regard to participation in MSP, what are your impressions now? And maybe we will have to continue thinking on that. Maybe I can't ask you this question right now, because this is something we should rather continue discussing during this week. But I would like to give this to you. Think about what is actually special. I'm not giving you any answer. It is rather the answers will have to come up, and they probably won't be the same in a few years. And so to say, concluding, what we see is we have some kind of formal minimum regulation, and then there's some kind of a practice with optional enhancements. And the problem with these kinds of changes and additions is always that we need to have transparency and even legitimacy in these enhancements, and that there's some kind of a difficulty if we have two adaptive processes. And I have a whole list of problems and challenges which I'm not going to draw right now, but I would like to come back to them tomorrow. From time and resources that define the purpose of participation is often undefined, which I'm now trying to at least make some advertisement in this group that think about that, about mobilization and about expectations and trust and education, and also centralism and integration, how we can get this to work. And what I also want to give you is some again, it's like the important questions. These are the ones that really somehow work if you're working with it. And my answer to my first question is stakeholder participation a buzzword, a panacea, or a necessity? Personally, I think it is a buzzword. It is definitely no panacea, but I think it probably is a necessity. And we will have to deal with this. And maybe you have other answers, and I'm looking forward to coming discussions in the course. So, are there any questions, comments? We continue tomorrow. Yes, and Thomas?